2.
So, Liz Cheney has become a new favorite of liberals, believe it or not, because she's not buying Trump's big lie. But what if Trump makes a comeback? It's Rob Nelson Live. Hey, I'm Rob Nelson. I used to host a show on Fox, and now I do a digital live stream called Rob Nelson Live. And my whole mission is to figure out how in this time of division we can find common ground.
Speech, and they're not allowed to do that anymore.
No, I understand what it's up.
They be focused on rebuilding California.
Oh, it's so true. Come on. This is where this gets real. He says you're heading. I wouldn't want to be black and driving in a car. Right. Point there, right? Some of what's in this music, you can't sanitize it. All right, hey everybody, welcome to Rob Nelson Live. Thank you guys, wherever I'm streaming at you guys from my platform here, my virtual studio in Florida. We got Crafty in the virtual studio in LA. As always, he's looking sharp. You can see there he is. He's got a little, he's a fashion statement. He's got a little thing, whatever it's called, the handkerchief. All right, and you guys, whatever platforms you're on, I already see we're getting comments from Facebook, YouTube, and all about Token Tim, about Tim Scott. I am going to get to Tim Scott in the middle of the episode. I'm going to start somewhere else, but I see you guys are all fired up about it, about his speech, about Senator Scott's speech, about people calling him Uncle Tim. Yes, it could get a little spicy. We will totally dive into it. So thanks for your early comments on it. Here's where I want to start, though. I like to always take a little, never like to get right to it. I like to spin around, keep everybody on their feet. And as always, you guys, love all your comments, so keep them coming. So I want to start with a little bit something on the pandemic. Man, there's a logic to all this. I was thinking about it. I watch a lot of dystopian science fiction stuff, and I thought it was fascinating that in the middle of this pandemic, we haven't gotten as dystopian as we could have. I don't know if you watch any dystopian shows, but like it's always like the world comes to a screeching halt and everybody goes crazy and all the rules are gone. It becomes the wild, wild west. It's all hell breaks loose. And we didn't really do that. I mean, we got our own little bit of a wild, wild west, but we didn't go completely dystopian. I mean, things kept going, Taco Bell was open the whole time, right? I mean, we were all watching Netflix. Some people like me were actually out doing things. Other people were holed up, but still getting their, getting their food delivered, their groceries delivered. People were having their FaceTimes. We didn't go full on dystopian. Was that because the pandemic wasn't as bad as we said? I'm not saying it wasn't bad, but it wasn't as bad as we think. Or is it because we're just like fundamentally kind of more civilized than all the dystopian, sci-fi movies and shows would have us think? I don't think we're very civilized, to be honest, because it certainly didn't bring out the better, the better side of the better angels of our human nature. But it did make me think about something. There's as we're winding out through the pandemic and sort of finding a way on the other side, and vaccine numbers are going up, there does seem to be a group of people who are almost patriotically attached to the pandemic. Like it's their patriotic duty to stay sort of pandemic vigilant. There was an interesting article in The Atlantic about it. And the writer is definitely, she's a progressive. So this wasn't like a conservative piece. And most stuff in The Atlantic is more left of center. And she talked about how people have, she framed it as liberals who can't quit lockdown. And she had a fascinating take on it, which was for the left of the left. She was like, it's almost like, she said, it's the diligence is like an expression, it's become an expression of political identity for a lot of people. And politically, they've done surveys. A recent survey, I think it was out of the University of New Hampshire, showed that Dems are definitely more worried than Republicans about the pandemic. And the more liberal you are, the more worried. So 35% who identified as very, very liberal were, so Dems were more worried than Republicans, but 35% who identified as very, very liberal were worried about getting seriously ill from COVID, whereas only 25% of people who identified just as liberal or more moderate were worried about that. 43% thought that COVID would have a very, very bad effect on their life if they got it. who were identified as very, very liberal, whereas only a little over 30% who were moderate or identified just as liberal thought getting COVID would have a very, very bad effect on their life. And she talked about in this article about where that pandemic vigilance comes from. She interviewed Monica Gandhi, who's a professor at UC San Francisco, med school professor. And Professor Gandhi describes herself as left of left and said, she said, I alienated a lot of my peers when I started, because the first part of the pandemic, I was all in for everything. When I started saying maybe we need to look at a timeline for ending mask mandates. Maybe we need to open schools. And she was like, wow, everybody just blasted me. And she said, the Professor Gandhi said, the overcaution on the left makes the right question the effectiveness of things like the vaccine. And I've said something similar to that before. And the whole idea in the article was how much the progressive politics has sort of driven one side of this, and all of it being a reaction to Donald Trump. And I've said that before, and many of you have noted that before. It seemed like if Trump said it, it was a reaction to Trump. So when Trump minimized COVID, people on the left, especially the far left, went even farther. If Trump said do it, we're not going to do it. If Trump said don't do it, we're going to do it. And I thought it was a fascinating kind of perspective on how there's this kind of identity politics that's come up for many people around the pandemic. Like it's become like, and if you think about it, if you're a progressive, progressives care about big causes. Progressives care about climate change, care about poverty. They care about systemic wrongs that need to be righted. So you're kind of looking, interesting in this article was sort of the idea of what if at some level progressives sort of saw an opportunity here from the pandemic to go, this goes beyond a disaster. The fundamental social contract's been broken, and this pandemic has only widened that divide. So we're even more into trying to address that divide. I thought it was so interesting because it really captured for me a more interesting angle in on just the politics around the pandemic. We simplify it, people, Republicans, Democrats, two different views, but I really do think there's an identity politics. It's come up on both sides of this, with people on the right having an identity politics that is, I will not do anything related to COVID acknowledgement, whether it's I won't acknowledge it's real, I won't wear a mask, I won't do blank. And on the other side going, I don't care what you do. I'm going to keep wearing my mask. I'm going to wear it outside. I'm going to forget about what the CDC says. I'm not going to listen to the science anymore. The pandemic is real and we can never stop our vigilance around the pandemic. But what I will say, do they really though, or just themselves? I'm missing the thread on this. Tyler Boylan, let me back up. Tyler Boylan said, not completely crazy. Give it some time, Rob. Who said this is over? I do think it's a little completely crazy, Tyler. Numbers are, look, who said it's over? It's not over, but we're already seeing a rapid decline in cases. They're seeing a dramatic drop off. Hospitalizations are very low. Younger people are getting sick more than older people. Hospitalizations are more young people, but they're not high numbers of young people being hospitalized. The death toll is falling. A significant part of the U.S. population has been vaccinated. And we're seeing, and I will make a prediction right here, everybody. You look in 3 weeks to a month, you're going to see the CDC, you're going to see the Biden administration, you're going to see everybody coming out, not just for political purposes and saying, we have made it past the worst part of this pandemic. Let's all of us start getting back to life. And we are. So I do think it is largely over. At Fort Walton Bleach, a pandemic should not be this divisive. And I agree. But part of why, and where I'm going with this, is why the pandemic was so divisive was because of Trump. Whether you like Trump or hate Trump, Trump became the dividing force. Had anybody else been president other than Donald Trump, I don't think the pandemic would have been as divisive. And again, if you're a Trump supporter, I'm not necessarily saying, I think Trump was a divisive president. I've said that the whole time. But Trump hit a button from day one, from when he went down the escalator, and everything became about anti-Trump or pro-Trump. So, and his approach to the pandemic didn't help. So as we kind of, a little movement, and you've seen it from a lot of progressive writers and thinkers saying, look, so much of this was a backlash to Trump. Everything is about pushing back on Trump. Trump's ability to stay relevant, even after he's been out of office for 3.5 months and is off social platforms, is stunning. He still bears this overwhelming presence, not just in the Republican Party, but on the consciousness of America, on the politics of America, on the Democratic Party. Like he's like the ghost that won't go away. But I do believe the drive was largely an anti-Trump drive and a pro-Trump drive that clashed and just heightened the divisions around the pandemic. I'm simplifying things, but underneath that. An interesting example of this is Liz Cheney. So Liz Cheney is the congresswoman from Wyoming. Wyoming only has one congressperson. Now, if you know that, they only have one congressperson for the whole state. Liz Cheney is in the seat that her father, former vice president and congressman before that, Dick Cheney, held. Liz Cheney is the number 3rd for now Republican in the House of Representatives. So she is she's 3rd in line in the minority party. And Liz Cheney has come out against what Trump did around the election repeatedly with what she calls the big lie. I am tired of the big lie of what the president keeps saying about this election being stolen. And in response to that, Liz Cheney has been attacked by many in the Republican Party and now is at risk of losing her leadership role. I think she's going to. I mean, Kevin McCarthy has pretty much, come out, who's, the de facto leader of the Republicans, has come out and said, the minority leader has said, on a hot mic he didn't know was on, I'm done with her. I can't deal with her anymore. She's probably going to lose her leadership role. And it's odd because she has now become kind of a darling of the media around her willingness to stand up to Trump. I want to play a little clip here of two. There's actually two of them. We're going to play one CNN, one's MSNBC, talking about Liz Cheney.
Representative Cheney is not backing down. She is continuing to be defiant and make the point that the former president is not good for the Republican Party and that she is not going to buy into the perpetuation of a continual lie of what happened in the 2020 election. And she is principled and she's going to stay there.
So that's MSNBC. She's principled and she's going to stay there. She's not buying the big lie. Now here's John Berman on CNN.
Kevin McCarthy is punishing Liz Cheney for telling the truth. She refused to embrace or ignore Trump's efforts to delegitimize the election, to embrace or ignore his efforts, as she says, to unravel the Constitution. But Liz Cheney, she's out of a job for telling the truth.
Now, I have some fun with this, you guys. Let's be honest, okay? But what's fascinating to me is how Liz Cheney has become kind of the darling of the media around this stuff. Now, look, I get it. Anytime anybody turned on Trump, the media on the left, of course, not Fox News, not Newsmax, would immediately prop them up. So if it was Michael Cohen, his lawyer, if it was, if it was a former military person, someone who served in his cabinet, anybody who came out against Trump, who worked with Trump, would immediately become like, Michael Cohen was the best. Like they literally thought he was like a scumbag liar until he was like, and Anthony Scaramucci too, like, as soon as they were willing to criticize Trump. I get it. It's politics. The media is playing politics. But Liz Cheney is a fascinating one to me. And here's why. So she I don't know how much you know about Liz Cheney, but when Liz Cheney was elected to her second, she's in her second term. When she was elected when she was first elected in 2017, when she was elected, she This is what Think Progress wrote. Think Progress is a left-leaning, obviously, organization. We got a little picture of this Think Progress organization. And now can we pull down the comment crafted? Yeah. And now the bad news about the new Congress. Liz Cheney will be a top House Republican. Dick Cheney's oldest child soon becomes the GOP's highest-ranking woman in the House. So here's the thing, right? I mean, that was the response to Liz Cheney back then. Liz Cheney is like a conservative's conservative. I mean, Liz Cheney makes almost anyone on the right seem kind of moderate to me. I mean, she started this thing called Keep America Safe, which they literally had to take down because it was like so hawkish. It was so like, let's go to war basically everywhere. She's a hawk of hawks. She she's an ultimate, what we call a neocon. She was a fill-in for Sean Hannity, for God's sakes. Her father, Dick Cheney, was the most hated man from the left in like 10 years. I mean, he was the shadow president to Bush. He was the driving force behind the Iraq War. He was a hard-edged, ultra-conservative, militaristic hawk. You know, I was never a huge Dick Cheney fan because I'm not a militaristic hawk. But that's literally the framework in which she came up in. You know, she is very anti-gay marriage, despite the fact that her sister is gay and married. And her sister, and it became a huge issue because her sister actually, like, you know, was very close to them. I don't know if you guys know this, but Dick Cheney, for all his conservatism, that was the one area he was very outspoken about, being very pro-gay rights, because his daughter was gay, and he was kind of like, it's personal to me. So it was this one area, and he never hit it. He's like, never, I'm not going to say stuff just to sound political. I'm supportive of this. This is my daughter. But his other daughter, Liz Cheney, couldn't do it. And when it came down to her first election, when she was getting slammed on it, she just came out and was like, I'm anti-gay marriage. And her sister was like, are you kidding me? And her sister's wife, they were like, you come to our house, you spend holidays with us, you consider my wife your sister, like, and now you're suddenly for politics, anti-gay marriage? And again, Liz Cheney wasn't saying you shouldn't have, like, you know, certain rights and freedoms and whatever, but just absolutely anti-gay marriage. You know, so I'm just going on the Liz Cheney thing because it shows just how much we're in the anti-Trump mode. So on all issues Trump related, Liz Cheney supported Trump 96% of the time. There were only 3 exceptions that I found. One was his compromise on immigration. He wanted to do some kind of a compromise on immigration. She voted against that. No compromise on immigration. 2 was Trump wanted to increase the debt limit for disaster relief. She didn't want to increase the debt limit for disaster relief. Voted against that. The 3rd was when Trump's administration wanted to put sanctions on North Korea, Iran, and Russia at various times. She voted against that. So her only exceptions really were when she was more extreme than he was. And yet this person who is literally the hawkest of the hawkest, who is as conservative as you can get, who is anti-gay marriage, anti so many things the left cares about, is suddenly principled. She's principled and strong and fighting for truth, and she's losing her job for standing for truth. That simple willingness to shift for one simple truth, I don't like Donald Trump, is how dystopian we've gotten, not around a pandemic, but around our politics. I mean, we're literally in political dystopia. And it's how much Trump still weighs in the consciousness of our country and our politics. So here's the thing. Trump is coming back. I'm not saying that like woohoo. I'm saying, like, I don't know if you guys heard, but he came out and said, he won't say he's running because he can't say he's running. He's not actually playing a silly game there. The minute Trump says he's running, all kinds of FEC stuff kicks in, all kinds of rules, conditions on what he can and can't do, how he can raise money, all that stuff. So he's not going to say he's running any sooner than he has to. He can be quietly doing all kinds of things right now, raising money, support, but he's not testing the waters. He all but said when asked, I think it was on a Fox News interview. I watched it. He all but said, you are going to be happy. People are going to be happy with what I'm going to tell you. I can't tell you now, but people are going to be happy. Now, obviously, the people he's referring to weren't people on the left. Although maybe if you're on the left, you're like, yeah, good for Trump. I hope Trump comes back. Like, you know, fun candidate to take down. The media is trying to spin like Trump won't have a shot. Trump doesn't have a chance. Trump's presence without a social media platform, and FYI, there's a reason Facebook isn't reinstating him and is not going to reinstate him, because they don't want to give him the platform. Facebook is one of the biggest platforms for fundraising for a political candidate, especially at a national level there is. It's a huge chink to not be able to, out of his armor, to not be able to have that, to not be able to use Facebook. But Trump's going to run, and think about it. Think about if Trump comes back, whichever side you're on. If you're on the right, chill out. If you're a Trumper, chill out, kick back, you know, have a Diet Coke and or pina colada or whatever you have. Let me interrupt myself. Fractal Force Workshop. Nobody's giving blanket approval of Liz Cheney or ideas. They're calling she did the right thing in one instance as being punished for it. Fractal Force Workshop. That's what they want. That's what they want you to think. Sure. And I'm not saying that's technically not what they're doing, but she is someone they despised. They literally, the left despised her for understandable reasons. If you're on the left, she represents everything they don't like. They vilified her and they vilified her father. And now they not only just say she's standing up against Trump, they literally call her principled. You can't be a principled person sometimes and not other times. If she's a principled person, she is principled all the time, and she's known for being a hard ass who doesn't change her mind. But then she's principled for her opposition to gay marriage. She's principled for her determination to have us in every war we can possibly imagine. She's principled for every single ultra-conservative, far-right view she has is principled. They may be wrong in your eyes, but she's principled. She's only principled in the media when she's standing up to Trump. She's unprincipled. She's horrible. She's bad. She's the second coming of Satan before all this. That's my point. I think we have to see through that. Yes, I get that they're propping her up for one right stand, but the only right stand is the one where you don't like Donald Trump. And for that, you get all the press and attention you want. And it's just kind of hypocritical on the part of the media, because it just shows how little objectivity both sides in the media have. But back to Trump running. Imagine if Trump comes back. You think he could win? You think he couldn't win? What's his opposition going to be? Is Joe Biden going to run for re-election? Seriously. He's going to be 82 years old. I'm not making fun of the guy, but he looks old. He looks tired. He's been in office for 3 months. Every time I see him, I saw him today standing. He just stands there like motionless, like giving a speech with sunglasses on, but he's in whatever, Louisiana, promoting infrastructure. I mean, there's no way Biden runs. There's no way Biden runs in 2024. And if he does, he loses. So people are going to be like, I don't think the guy can make it 4 more years. He's not Franklin Roosevelt, where people were so in love with the guy, they didn't care that he was going to die in office. They keep reelecting him and let Harry Truman take over. But Harris going to run? Kamala Harris, Vice President Harris? Kamala Harris is not a likable candidate. I don't care what the media's done. I don't care what Vanity Fair does. I don't care how much they want to prop her up. She is not Michelle Obama. Michelle Obama was genuinely, like, people loved her. The media makes Kamala Harris seem like she's whatever. She's very unpersonable. She's very fake. She's very awkward. She couldn't even win her own state. Nobody voted for her in the primary, which, by the way, is not just a thing on the left. I always like to point out, Gerald Ford is the only president in American history who never got elected to be where he is. I mean, he was a member of Congress, right? But he never ran on a ticket. He never ran, period, right? Gerald Ford was Richard Nixon's last vice president, right? Nixon had Spiro Agnew. They were elected together. Spiro Agnew had to resign because he was corrupt. When Spiro Agnew resigned, Nixon appointed Gerald Ford to be vice president. He never ran. Then Nixon resigns, Ford becomes president. He's the only guy who became president without ever having to run for president or even as a vice president. Again, sort of a sidebar there. But Kamala Harris, no way. She doesn't win. I don't buy it. So unless somebody in the Democratic Party is going to challenge and run against Biden or Harris if they decide to run, which has happened it happened with Lyndon Johnson back in the day and Hubert Humphrey, but it hasn't happened since. If that happens, maybe. But otherwise, and someone challenges Trump on the Republican side, maybe. But there's a good chance Donald Trump is running for president. And there's a decent chance Donald Trump wins. And my question to all of you is, what happens if Donald Trump becomes president again? I mean, it's like going to be the worst sequel ever. And if we don't get our heads together and figure some things out, and Trump becomes president round 2, we are going to spiral into the biggest, ugliest mess we have ever seen. Switching gears now to Tim Scott. Tim Scott, so I started with, Tim Scott, the junior senator from South Carolina, gave the rebuttal to Joe Biden's first speech before Congress. And Tim Scott said a lot of things. And Tim Scott's gotten a lot of heat and a lot of flack. He's black, he's conservative, and he's a compelling, engaging person and candidate. And Tim Scott has said a number of things before this rebuttal, in which he was challenged a lot by people for being, again, he's a conservative black guy, so he's going to get questioned by a lot of people on the left about whether you can be a conservative black guy. And, I've gotten frustrated at it before, whatever your politics, the guy clearly, has come out numerous times talking around about racial violence, about, I remember one instance in particular, it was after the church shooting in South Carolina. He was just kind of like, I cried. He's like, I was devastated seeing somebody come in and kill black people because they were black. And people said, oh, he was like doing performative, whatever. And he's like, tears in his eyes. He's like, I'm not faking this. Right. The guy clearly, as all people face in this world when asked who are people of color, it's like when I talk to cops, they're like, I am a police officer and I am a black man or a black woman. Those things coexist and sometimes they have different things. So Tim Scott is a black man and he's a conservative political candidate and senator. But his response was basically to question all kinds of things. He questioned where the real cause of disunity was coming from. He blamed it on Biden. He questioned the fact that we've spent years kind of telling people not to look at the color of people's skin, and now we look at the color of people's skin, but especially if they're white people, and say you're inherently bad if you're white. But where he really hit a nerve was when he said this.
From colleges to corporations to our culture, people are making money and gaining power by pretending we haven't made any progress at all, by doubling down on the divisions we've worked so hard to heal. You know this stuff is wrong. Hear me clearly. America is not a racist country.
And that set Twitter on fire, or some people like to say black Twitter, but it was black and white Twitter. On fire about it. To the whole phrase Uncle Tim trended on Twitter for 12 hours, which became its own scandal why Twitter let a racial slur trend for 12 hours before they stopped it. But regardless, you know how you guys who watch me know I think about that. Like, I hate the over censoring, period. But if you're going to censor one side, censor both. That's not going to happen. I'd rather we didn't censor anybody. Regardless, Twitter exploded. I cherry picked just a couple little things because there's so many to put up. Here was one. I got two tweets to show you guys. Here's one. Somebody put up. She said, this is a guy. Do you see this man? This is Senator Tim Scott. Timmy just said, hear me clearly. America's not a racist country. Timmy is full of shit. Don't be a Timmy. And then we have another one who's just a woman who said, good morning to all black people except for Tim Scott, an activist. Neither of those people are particularly well known. One of the things I noticed is so many of the Twitter comments came from white people, and they all have like 60 followers, 100 followers. And they were all like, he's a horrible, how could he do this? He's horrible. And it just fascinated me, like, how people were going to do it. I'm going to go after him. But more prominent people did take him on, including Van Jones on CNN, who had this to say.
I think they were smart to put Tim Scott up there. He's sort of, the Biden of his party in that he comes across warm, authentic. He tells the stories, that kind of stuff. The problem isn't the messenger. The messenger was great, but he lost a lot of African Americans by the tens of millions when he said America is not a racist nation.
So here's the question I want to put out to you guys. Is America a racist nation? Now, qualify on Van Jones. Van Jones doesn't always believe everything he says. And I watched Van Jones give a talk at UCLA a few years back, and what he was saying was mocking people who were overreacting to Trump and sort of saying in 4 years someone else would come in. And I went up to him afterward and I was like, look, on CNN, you literally are constantly, everything's extreme. And he was like, that's my job. He's like, that's what CNN wants me to do. And if I didn't do that, my followers would hate me. But when I'm talking honestly, I can say something different. That annoyed me. But some of you may know the story I've told before when I worked at Fox News, and Sean Hannity sort of asked me, he said, you don't believe everything you say, do you, Rob? And I was like, yeah. He's like, do you think I believe everything I say? I'm like, I hope you do. He's like, I don't always believe everything I say. I think, pundits do that. They say things to feed to their base. But I think in this case, Van Jones, I get the sense really at some level does think that America's a racist country and that you kind of can't say otherwise and you're just completely in the dark if you think that. And I want to get into this issue with you guys. Is America a racist country? Now, first of all, the response, interestingly enough, from other people was a little different. Kamala Harris came out and said she doesn't think America's a racist country. Jim Clyburn, who's the congressman from South Carolina, who's the reason Joe Biden made it through the primaries, a longtime civil rights advocate, one of the remaining icons, and a long-term politician, black politician, obviously from the South, came out and said, America's not a racist country. He's like, I agree with Tim Scott. America wouldn't have elected a black president if it was. He then went on to criticize all kinds of other things about about what Republicans are doing and what Tim Scott said. But he's like, I don't think we're a racist country. And Joe Biden himself was asked the question, and here's a clip of it.
The rebuttal from the junior senator of South Carolina last night, Tim Scott. He said, among other things, America isn't racist. Is it?
No, I don't think the American people are racist. I don't think America's racist, but I think the overhang from all of the Jim Crow and before that slavery have had a cost, and we have to deal with it.
So, and this is where it gets a little interesting. I want to pull up one more tweet. Yamiche Alcindor, who is a reporter for PBS. So she's not just some random person. You probably recognize her from press conferences and whatever. She's an anchor and a reporter for PBS. Had this to say. Senator Tim Scott, the only black Republican senator currently serving, says he's experienced discrimination both by being stopped by police unfairly and by being called Uncle Tom and the N-word by liberals. Quote, America is not a racist country, he says. So here's where I go with this. First of all, I don't think America's a racist country, and I'll tell you why. I agree with Jim Clyburn. A racist country would not elect a black man president of the United States twice. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying just because you elect a black person, there's not racism. But if you are fundamentally a nation made up mostly of racist people, there's no way in a democracy where the majority vote wins, and in Obama's case, he won the majority of the vote, not just the Electoral College, where the popular vote is going to go to a black man twice if the majority of people are racist. Racist people aren't going to elect a black person to run their country. Not going to happen. And you could argue, okay, half the country is racist then. That's an option. But the majority of Americans can't be racist if they elected a black man president twice. And that's the simplest example. South Africa, a racist country for sure, elected a black man president. But they only elected a black man president when they dismantled the system in which a minority of the people who were white ran the country. As soon as they empowered the majority of the people who were black, they elected a black man president. South Africa would never have elected a black man president when a minority of the people were white and racist. So both of them could be exceptions that prove the rule. But the simple fact is, guys, I just don't buy it that a fundamentally racist country elects a black man president. That's one example of many. There are so many other things that I don't think but you could argue, well, a fundamentally racist country might still have black superstars for entertainment, might still have black athletes, might still put black people in positions of power, maybe, but you don't make them the number one position governing your country. Cruzen, are we still a democracy? Yes, we are still a democracy. We are, again, I've had this argument many times. I think our democracy is actually doing pretty well. No, qualify that. We're having lots of problems, but I don't think fundamentally the foundations of our democracy are in trouble. I don't think fundamentally the structure of the United States is about to fall apart. And I do believe we are still a democracy, but a democracy that has enormous work to do. And we are hurting ourselves every day by the divisive paths we go down, which is why I go back to the fact that I don't think America is a racist country. But that said, that doesn't mean there isn't racism in America. So when the PBS reporter, when she says, how can, you get stopped by cops and people say the N-word to you, and yet you say we're not a racist country. And this is what I don't get. The two can exist. There can be racism, and you can have experienced racism, and almost every black person I know has experiences of racism. And it doesn't mean the whole country is fundamentally a racist country. Racism exists in America. Racism has always existed in America, but I would argue it exists less now than it did before. And anybody who says that's not true, I don't know what you're smoking. Like, there's no way we are more racist than we were when there was slavery. There is no way we are more racist than we were in the 1940s when there were and 50s when there were Jim Crow laws. When literally black people were second-class citizens and couldn't go in places white people went. You know, when they had separate units for black soldiers in World War II. When there was no integration in schools. We are not more racist than we were. So we've moved away from being, you know, you could argue country was built on racism. I can get to that in a second, but we're not fundamentally a racist country. You know, it's interesting. I like to talk to random people. So I was on the beach today in Florida, and I saw a guy working out. Big guy, you know, 300 plus pounds, big. I was like, okay, this guy's training. He was doing stuff. I'm like, he's training. He's a lineman. He's you know, big. So he's probably not, you know, looked young, not a pro, but whatever. So you know me, I go talk to people. So I went up to him, we started talking. I'm going to leave his name out of this because, you know, he knows I said when this was all done, I'm probably going to talk about this in my show, but I'm not going to I don't put the guy up on blast or whatever. But he plays for Florida, for University of Florida football team, a big football program. And he's black and he's about 325 pounds and he's big, right? Big guy. Dreadlocks, big tattoos, the whole thing. And I just, I said to him after talking about football for a minute, I was like, let me ask you something. I said, I'm doing a show and I'm talking about this stuff. Do you think America's a racist country? Now, this is one person, and I never think one person's response is indicative of everybody, but I ask a lot of people questions. And to me, I certainly take in what real people tell me. I'm all about what real people have to say. And his response was fascinating to me. He was like, he's like, what? No, he's like, I think there's a lot of racism. He grew up in Jacksonville. So Jacksonville has a long history of racial tension and some ugly, and I've said this before, there's just some ugly racial past. He's like, but no, I don't think America's fundamentally a racist country. He's kind of like, I think things are a lot better than they were. But then he pointed something out. He said, but Trump, he's like, I think Trump had a lot to do with this. He's like, Trump sort of, but he qualified. I don't know that Trump himself was a racist, but he fed all that stuff to people that then brought him out of the woodwork kind of thing. But he made an interesting point after that. He was like, but so racism seems to be getting worse under Trump and stuff going on that police, whatever going on. It's like, but it's getting worse under Biden too. So he's like, I don't know. Like, did we just unleash something? I'm thinking, right. Did we let the genie out of the bottle? Maybe, but it was interesting as we kept talking. I asked him, because he didn't fundamentally feel, although he'd experienced, like every black person, lots of racism. I asked him about the classic one, being a big black guy walking down the street. And, he's like, yep, every time I see it in people's faces, white people's faces, not racists, white people, often liberals, people who would, to his face, be completely whatever, not at all hostile. And he says, I see it. I see them look at me. And it was interesting because I've said a lot of black guys I know will talk about that, but it was interesting because he's a football player. So he said, the thing is, I have a lot of friends who are big white guys because they're football players. He's like, they're as big as me or bigger. And he's like, and they never get that. Nobody ever looks at them. He's like, they see them and they think they look like nice. They see me. I got the dreads, the tattoos. I'm 300 plus pounds. And they think I'm scared. Is that racism? I've said before, it's some kind of unconscious racism, some kind of deep bias. People who are actively not racist have this irrational fear. Is that racism? Maybe. Are we a racist country because most white people have that? I don't know. What I want to get to is systemic racism, because systemic racism is real. And Tyler Boynton, who's been on the feed today from Facebook, said something to me a few months ago in a DM, and I wanted to address it, which was, is it racism or income inequality or both? And then he posed a good question, Tyler, which was systemic racism leads to generational income inequality, but income inequality is not 100% caused by racism. And it was a fascinating issue, and I've brought it up, a version of it before. There's been a history of racism. The guy on the beach said to me, he's like, look, let's be honest. I think America was built on racism. Most black people will say that. If they're honest, even if you're a conservative, though, you can't deny what we did. Doesn't mean we're still doing it all. We've made progress. But systemic racism caused a lot of problems. The things, the barriers, the stuff I talked about, caused economic inequalities, caused housing, caused poverty, caused the breakup of the families. Thank you, Joe Biden, for your crime bill, which I love to point out because it's one of the more modern elements of systemic racism that helped destroy the black family by locking everybody up for things and having a two-tiered system of justice. Black people go to jail for something white people don't go to jail for. Not made up, a fact. But systemic racism is there. It's been there. Is it getting better? Yes, but it was built in. So we have to work to remove it. Arguing about whether we're a racist country or not almost misses the bigger point. It's like the 3/5 compromise thing. I don't know if any of you saw that. It blew up when Justin Lafferty, a Tennessee state rep, came out last week and said the 3/5 compromise, which was where they said 3/5, slaves would count as 3/5 of a person when they were putting the union together, was somehow meant to eliminate slavery, and people blew up on him. And I'm thinking, where did you come up with that? Where did you come up with the idea that the 3/5 compromise was meant to eliminate slavery? Was not meant to eliminate slavery at all. But on the other side of it, the 3/5 compromise, where they said black people counted as 3/5 of a person, was not actually an attempt to say black people were only 3/5 of a person. It was actually a move by the Northern abolitionists to limit what the South could use to have more of a population. The South had a big population, but a small population of white people compared to black people. And they wanted to count all their black slaves as people in the count so they could have more power in the Congress. And the white abolitionists wanted them to count for zero. They wanted zero. They wanted black people to count as zero people so that because they're not free people and they can't vote. So you don't get to count them as people to give you more political power. So they settled on 3/5 because that was the only way. It was the only way the union was going to come together. And here's my question. What would have happened if they hadn't done it? Was it an immoral compromise? I've always said it was. I've always felt the 3/5 compromise was an immoral compromise. Not because they made 3/5. The 3/5 was to try to decrease the South's power. It had nothing to do with trying to say black people only count as 3/5. The immoral compromise was if they hadn't done that, then the South would not have joined the union. We'd have had not had a United States. What would have happened is the South would have had more slaves. Slavery would have lasted longer, but eventually the agrarian South would have collapsed, whereas the North would have grown and prospered. Maybe we shouldn't have done it. Maybe we shouldn't have come together. But here's the point, right? What would have happened if we hadn't done it? What would have happened if we hadn't made the immoral compromise? Because let's just say that's what it was, an immoral compromise. Well, I'll tell you what would have happened. None of us would be here to start with. We wouldn't be alive, right? None of the things that have happened, we don't know that they would have happened, whether it's culture, inventions, the internet. I mean, Hitler probably would have taken over the world, right? Or not. I don't know. There would have been no World War I where we are a major factor. I mean, our whole trajectory would have been different. If I could say you can't undo history. You can't wash it away. If I said you can go back and change it to you, a white person, a black person, you can go back and do it. Undo it. No 3/5 compromise. There is no union. There's no coming together. There's no United States. The South lives on its own and slavery collapses on its own eventually. Would you go back and change it? I bet most of you would say no, because you'd be erasing your entire history. Your own life would be erased. So back to my guy on the beach. Because what struck me about him, and by the way, this guy was just like the nicest guy, and I said to him even, I don't understand why people would be afraid to look up to him. Like he had this like twinkle in his eyes, just like a generous, warm face and demeanor. But I get it. He's like, it's not rational. But he said, I don't feel like I experience like racism all the time in my life. He's a new generation. He's 20, less than half, I'm more than twice his age. I'm a whole nother generation kind of looking at the world, and it's his future, and it's his generation that's going to carry this all forward. That's going to the one that we're supposed to be trying to do things for. And I thought his perspective kind of like, yeah, we were built on racism, but no, I think we're making progress, and no, I don't think everyone's racist, and I don't look at the world that way. And he's not unique. I don't think most people do, but we amplify that voice. We amplify it. So here's the question. Can we acknowledge the mistakes of the past? Not write them off, not be like, no, let's not talk about slavery. That happened a long time ago. No. No, it happened and it's real. And it's the foundation on which other things got built. Can we own that? It's a mistake, a big mistake that we have to live with every day. Can we live with it? Can we own it? Can we take ownership of it? Not pretend to make it go away. Not be like, stop talking about that. While at the same time, realizing that those mistakes led us to where we are. And it's the only basis on which we have to go forward and do better, maybe better than we would have done if we hadn't made those mistakes. It's not a pass on what we've done. It's not a get out of jail free card. Like I said, we live with our mistakes, but moral absolutism is such a dangerous, dangerous place to be. It's a lose-lose process. And that guy on the beach, he wasn't a moral absolutist, nor was he an Uncle Tim. He wasn't selling out anything. Not a piece of him was selling out. And oddly enough, his politics, when I pushed him, he was like, I'm not super left. I'm really not super right. I guess I'm in the middle, which is what I hear from so many people. The absolutism is destroying us. Cruson asked, are we still a democracy? We are. But our future, our success as a democracy depends on ending this all or nothing binary approach to things. I'm Rob Nelson Live. Thanks for watching.